Hey, how's it going? It's Brendan Hong here. It's a quick one, but pretty excited to have the minutes played by player and then showing across the playoff games. So, I'm going to show you the output and then the screencast on how I did the data prep at the end. So, pulling data from basketball reference like before for a subset of players on the Nets, the ones that played in the playoffs, just plotting the minutes played by whether they won or lost a game, date along the horizontal axis, players minutes played color coded. This one's not as informative. This one wasn't bad. I did it split by whether they were home or away matches. An interesting pattern that stuck out was Durant in this kind of dirty yellow color. At the top, you can see hovered around 40 minutes when he played away consistently across the two playoff series. So they played the Bucks in the second series, and who did they beat again? Boston Celtics. All right, Boston Celtics in the first series. But here you can see Durant 40 minutes dropping down to maybe 30, back up again, and then from June 7th, I'm guessing that might be game 1 series 2, the minutes played is just on an upward trajectory for home games but not for away games. So kind of interesting to see that pattern. And then you've got a bunch of players that are playing less on away games. So Brown was one of them there. Sort of goes up, peaks here. Maybe that's June 10th, and then dropping down. Maybe it's better to label the horizontal axis as which game it is in which series. Didn't do that. Here's Griffin, kind of increasing slightly over the course of the playoff series on away games. And who's purple? Mike James. But yeah, can kind of pick out that there are quite obvious different trends for away and home matches. Who's this in light blue? It's like Harris. This slightly darker blue is Irving, who stopped playing here June 7th. Harris's minutes and Griffin's minutes go up quite a lot in the last few home games before they get knocked out. Same with Brown, spikes up. So we'll go down. I've done a split on, it's basically starters and bench players. In the code I've called it reduced minutes, but these are the players that played more for all their games. And you see that zigzag for Durant because you've got the home and away games mixed in. So the pattern, it's more variability. And these are your bench players. Green doesn't play for the whole middle period, comes back in for the last few games. Shamit up and down. James seems to have done well for a bit. Doesn't play at the start or at the end. Tyler Johnston had a little go towards the start. And who else was interesting? Claxton kind of dropped off at the end, but was fairly stable, 10 minutes going up to 18 maybe. Towards the end, not playing many minutes at all. And here was the interesting one where you got to split out the different series, and I have listed it by game. So the Boston Celtics. Johnston in light blue, color coded, plays more. It's the same as before, but much clearer. You can see it by series. James doesn't really play in the first series, plays a little bit in the second. Green comes back in game 4, the bottom panel here. And then the same again for the starters. So the profile for the Boston Celtics is much more consistent. Those 4 guys, Harris, Durant, Irving, and Harden, playing similar minutes. I think it's Harris in the blue who's playing slightly less, and Griffin and Brown playing around the 20 minutes. In the Boston Celtics series, in the Milwaukee series, they is much more of a variance. Brown doesn't play much, plays 20 minutes game 4, dropping down to, I don't know, is that 5 minutes in game 6? And who's that in the, this kind of like a aqua. That's Harden coming back for games 5, 6, and 7. And Harris playing solid minutes, as with Griffin, with slight upward slope from games 4, 5, and 6 to 7 in the Milwaukee Bucks series. And here again, it's the same thing in a stacked bar chart. So it's 48 minutes a game times 5 players would be more accurate. I think I've rescaled it down to 48. So maybe it's representing percentage of the 48 minutes that would have been played. So yeah, I think the line graphs are probably easier to read. What surprised me here in game 7, looks like almost Brown has almost equal minutes to Durant and maybe even Harden. But we know Durant plays 53 minutes, including overtime, for game 7 of the Bucks series. Yeah, the bench players. They're playing almost nothing. What are they? Like less than 4 minutes in total for the whole bench, if you call them that, in game 7. So it's not technically the bench because I've got 6 players in the starter group. I guess Irving didn't play, so yeah, it is the bench. A massive drop off in game 7. So I guess they took a chance. In some of my other commentary, I was questioning that strategy, and perhaps they went all in and came up short, unfortunately. So I think this data is getting interesting, mainly for the interest in following the NBA playoffs. The data is data prep's pretty straightforward, but yeah, so here's some interesting output, and you can dig into the screencast or code if you like. Let's get into it.
And they're taking advantage of people when they're in a sad place, or when they're nervous or insecure. I want to make people to know that I'm focused. I'm focused on getting all the attention, all of the attention, so I can do a couple things. My number one goal for all of you is first and foremost, to build self-esteem. I want all of you to be more confident tomorrow than you were yesterday because you're spending time paying attention to my crap, because it's very simple. My crap speaks to this. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit. All suck at shit. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit. When you figure out what you're good at and where saying you can't, or your older brother because he's insecure, not giving you love or self-esteem so that you can succeed. I'm tired of the people closest to you, because of their insecurities and weaknesses, giving you feedback and putting you in a paradigm, in a path that keeps you suppressed, because they've got their insecurities. They've got their insecurities. They've got their insecurities. They've got their insecurities. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit. All suck at shit. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit. All suck at shit. Stop worrying about what you're not and start focusing on who you are. We all suck at shit.
Akira.
He's got class.
Let's welcome to the stage Mr. Gary Vaynerchuk.
All right, let's go. Let's sit down. Let's do this. I wish we had better perspective. I wish that there was some weird genie that could take us back into time so that every one of you could live one fucking day in your great-great-grandparents' shoes and understand how fucking good you have it. Like if you really, really understood I'm not naive to what's happening in our society. Let me just say this very clear so everybody gets it through their fucking dome. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the best. This is the best. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. Fascinated by this. Fascinated by fucking mindset. It's a binary decision if you're gonna be positive or negative about shit. When you bet on optimism, when you're on the offense, when you are playing towards intangibles, you do something super duper interesting. You start suffocating excuses. If you asked me what the number one thing is that I'm thankful for that my parents gave me, taking me from a communist country and moving me to the US, parenting me well, roof and clothes, if you ask me the number one thing I wake up every morning and thank that my parents did, is I never saw either one of them complain about jack shit. And it basically created learned behavior for me. I am incapable of actually complaining about shit. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the best. This is the best. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the I see is people sitting around dwelling around dumb shit, what they don't have, instead of focusing on what they do have. The internet is a fucking miracle. It's a fucking miracle. The internet is a fucking miracle. It's a fucking miracle. There was no side hustle for your great-grandparents. When it was 9 p.m., it was dark and cold outside. We just get used to shit so fast. And in our speed of getting used to how fucking awesome it is, I'm just desperate for you to not lose perspective. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. This is the best. This is the best. This is the greatest year to ever be alive in the history of mankind. Both my grandfathers had the same exact thing that I had, and because they were Jewish in communist Russia post-World War II, their communism put them both in jail for 10 years in Siberia. Like, just think about that. Timing, opportunity. Yes. Life is binary. It's either offense or defense. You are either sitting in your seat right now on the offense or you're not. There is no fucking half pregnant. There's no in between. You're either this or that.
Akira.
East Coast close.
You're either on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or defense. I think a lot of people think they're in the middle, in a transit. You're only on the offense or the defense. I've realized that I've been on the offense my whole life because I never felt entitled to anything. An incredible thing happens when you're born with very little. You know, I was born in the Soviet Union, we come to America, I live in a studio apartment in Queens. My parents bought me 6 toys in my entire life kind of thing. We took one family vacation in my entire life. When I wanted Nintendo, my mom looked me dead in the face and said, good, go buy it. On the flip side, she reinforced things that came natural to me and made them the most important things. While I was getting D's and F's, and every other immigrant parent was making their kids get A's and B's because they thought that's what mattered, my mom was accelerating anytime that I showed compassion, anytime that I showed empathy, anytime that I showed gratitude. You're either on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or defense. I think a lot of people think they're in the middle, in a transit. You're only on the offense or the defense. I once opened a door, and I will remember this for the rest of my life. I was 8. I opened a door for a woman. You would have thought that I won a Nobel Peace Prize. My mom made such a big deal about that. You have to understand what she did, and no matter how bad you have it, millions, billions have it worse. And so for me, the mindset that I've rolled in this whole game is nobody cares. Nobody cares. And not that they don't care, people have compassion, but they can't. Think about how much you can care, even for the people you love the most. It's just a human thing. And more importantly, we have it ridiculously good. You're either on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or invention in the history of the human being. All the things that you worry about of like the man stopping you or something stopping you, all these things that we envision that are the reasons why you haven't been successful, this internet thing is taking away. The internet is the middleman. It's true. You have to understand how ridiculous this thing is. The ability for you to create content, videos, and written word direct to the audience eliminates any excuse you come up with. I can literally spend the next month, one by one, systematically going through this big room, and no matter what excuse you come up with, the answer is going to be, and we have to eliminate complaining and dwelling. We have to. And that's what she did for me. She instilled the right positive things, and most of all, she eliminated fucking excuses. She eliminated entitlement. She eliminated fucking excuses. She eliminated entitlement. You're either on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or defense. I think a lot of people think they're in the middle, in a transit. You're only on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or defense. You're either on the offense or defense. I think a lot of people think they're in the middle, in a transit. You're only on the offense or defense.
Three words to give me inspiration for any day I'm feeling down.
3 words.
3 words.
You're gonna die. Yeah, that's inspiration. Do something about it. Don't look at anybody else. I have no fucking idea.
I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. And you would, of course, be able to alter your time sense and slip, say, 75 years of subjective time into 8 hours of sleep. You would, I suppose, start out by fulfilling all your wishes. You could design for yourself what would be the most ecstatic life. Love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, love affairs, banquets, dancing girls, wonderful journeys, gardens, music beyond belief. Music beyond belief. Music beyond belief. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. And then after a couple of months of this sort of thing at 75 years a night, you would be getting a little taste for something different. You would move over to an adventurous dimension where there were certain dangers involved and the thrill of dealing with dangers. And you could rescue princesses from dragons and go on dangerous journeys, make wonderful explosions and blow them up. Eventually get into contests with enemies. And after you've done that for some time, you'd think up a new wrinkle to forget that you were dreaming, so that you would think it was all for real, and to be anxious about it, because it'd be so great when you woke up. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. And then you say, well, like children who dare each other on things, how far out could you get? What could you take? What dimension of being lost, of abandonment of your power, what dimension of that could you stand? You could ask yourself this, because you know you'd eventually wake up. After you'd gone on doing this, you see, for some time, you would suddenly find yourself sitting around in this room with all your personal involvement, problems, etc., talking with me. How do you know that's not what you're doing? Could be. Because after all, what would you do if you were God? I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. Any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted to. I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted to. 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 I wonder what you would do if you had the power to dream any dream you wanted to. What would you do if you were God? 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 If, looking at it from another way, we push technology to its furthest possible development. There's a myth. There is in the beginning the divine bird which lays the egg of the world, and the egg splits, and the upper is the heavens, and the lower is the earth. So when the worlds are manifested, the Lord breathing out says, hung. And when the worlds are withdrawn, the breath comes back. But if you say hung, sa, hung, sa, hung, sa, hung, it becomes sa, hung. Sa. Sa. Ahang. That means, Sa means that, the truth, Aham, I am that. Imagine when we get to the final moment in which the world is blown up. Imagine the countdown. This is the end. Somebody's pushed the button. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What are you listening to? And you can sit and listen to the little waves on the seashore. And you'll get back here into this kind of thinking, and you're hearing the ocean of the universe going. And that's your breathing, too. It's all one rhythm. So it may be that every star was once a planet populated by intelligent people who found out about the fundamental energy of the universe, blew themselves up. And as they blew up, they scattered all kinds of stuff out, which became little planets. Which in a long time, life started all over again. What are you listening to? What are you listening to? The Hindu theory is very odd. Every kalpa in the Manvantara period, where there's a manifested world, is divided into 4 subdivisions of time, each one of which is called a yuga. That means roughly an epoch or an era. And there are 4 yugas, and they're named after the different throws in the Indian game of dice. There are 4 such throws, and the first is called Krita. That means, Kri means to do. It's when we say something is done, truly done. It's the perfect throw of 4. The second is called Treta, which is the throw of 3. The next is called Svapara, which is the throw of 2. And the final one is called Kali, which means the worst throw, which is the throw of 1. Now, each of these periods of the kalpa are of different lengths. Krita is the longest, and Kali is the shortest, and so ranged. So that when the world is first manifested, as in those dreams that I were mentioning to you, the world is in a golden age to begin with. It is perfect. It is perfect. And that is the longest period of time. Then when we get a little bit more adventurous, you see, Treta means that in this era, a kind of disharmonious element enters into things. It's like a 3-legged chair isn't so secure as a 4-legged chair. It's just a bit inclined to tip. And as it were, a fly in the ointment. The snake in the garden. Then comes Dvapara, in which the forces of good and evil are equally balanced. And finally Kali, which is the shortest period, where the forces of evil are triumphant. And the world is destroyed at the end of it. For then the Godhead appears in the form of Shiva, who represents the destructive aspect of the divine energy, whereas Brahma is the creative, Vishnu the preserver, Shiva the destroyer. But Shiva is always the destroyer in the sense of the liberator, the guy who breaks up the ruts. And he comes on with a blue body and 10 arms, and a necklace of skulls. Indian gods have many arms, because they are cosmic centipedes. They do all things without having think about how to manipulate its legs, like you don't have to think how to grow your hair. And as Shiva dances what is called the Tandava, which is the dance of destruction at the end of the cycle, at the end of the kalpa, you will see that his hands contain clubs and knives and bells, but one hand is like that. And that gesture means don't be afraid. It's a big act. It is all, as it were, the outflowing. The web is a trap, like the spider's web is a trap for flies. Also, the lovely embroideries are worn by women as traps for men, from a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. And I want to consider the web as something playful. You see, there are so many ways of looking at it. And you will find that all these ways are right, but what we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. Of the view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. What we need is the fullness of the view. From a certain point of view. From a certain point of view. So, this is a view of the world as a system of mutual exploitation and of maximal selfishness. Now, it's a very profitable view to explore. Everybody should do in their lifetime sometime two things. One is to consider death, to observe skulls and skeletons. Consider death. And to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. That is a very gloomy thing for contemplation, but it's like manure. Just as manure fertilizes the plants and so on. So the contemplation of death and the acceptance of death is very highly generative of creative life. You get wonderful things out of that. And the other thing to contemplate is to follow the possibility of the idea that you are totally selfish. That you don't have a good thing to be said for you at all. You are a complete, utter rascal. You are a complete, utter rascal. Now, the Christians have avoided this. Because although they say in their Episcopalian form of confession that we have erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep, and we have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts, too much, We have offended against thy holy laws. We have left undone those things we ought to have done, and done those things which we ought not to have done, and there is no health in us. But it ought to be different. And we're going to do our best to amend with the help of God's grace. That is a real con act. If you equate health with genuine love and perfect unselfishness, then in that sense there is no health in us when we look at ourselves from this point of view. Consider death. To observe skulls and skeletons. Consider death. And to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. consider death, to observe skulls and skeletons, consider death, and to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. One of the very great things that C.G. Jung contributed to mankind's understanding was the concept of the shadow. That everybody has a shadow, and that the main task of the psychotherapist is to do what he called to integrate the evil, to, as it were, put the devil in us in its proper function. Because you see, it's always the devil, the unacknowledged one, the outcast, the scapegoat, the bastard, the bad guy. You see, the black sheep of the family. It's always from that point, which we could call the fly in the ointment. You see, that generation comes. In other words, in the same way as in the drama, to have the play, it's necessary to introduce a villain. It's necessary to introduce a certain element of trouble. So, in the whole scheme of life, there has to be the shadow. The shadow. The bastard, the bad guy, the black sheep of the family. The shadow. Integrate the evil. Integrate the evil. The shadow. The bastard, the bad guy, the black sheep of the family. The shadow. Everybody has a shadow, because without the shadow there can't be the substance. So this is why there is a very strange association between crime and all naughty things and holiness. You see, holiness is way beyond being good. Good people aren't necessarily holy people. A holy person is one who is whole, who has, as it were, reconciled his opposites. And so there's always something slightly scary about holy people. And other people react to them in very strange ways. They can't make up their minds whether they're saints or devils. So holy people have, throughout history, always created a great deal of trouble, along with their creative results. Take Jesus, for example. Trouble that Jesus created is absolutely incalculable. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisition, the heaven only knows what's gone on in the name of Jesus. Freud's a big troublemaker, as well as a great healer, you see. It all goes together. The shadow. The bastard, the bad guy, the black sheep of the family. The shadow. Integrate the evil. Integrate the evil. The shadow. The bastard, the bad guy, the black sheep of the family. The shadow. Everybody has a shadow, because without the shadow there can't be the substance. So the holy person is scary, because he is like the earthquakes, or better still, he's like the ocean. See, the ocean, on a lovely sunny day, you can say, oh, isn't that gorgeous, and you can go into it and relax and float around. But boy, when the storm comes, does that thing get mad? Terrifying. So there is in us the ocean, you see? And Jung felt that the whole point was to bring the two together by a kind of fantastic honesty, to penetrate one's own motivations to the depths. Jung had a tremendous humor. And he knew that nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success exploring your motivation and your dark, unconscious depths, that nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success, but there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. You know, do you see how, in a strange way, there's a certain sanity in that? When a person indulges in a certain kind of duplicity, of deception, there is something, you all laughed when I said that. There was something humorous about it. And this humor is a very funny thing. Basically, humor is an attitude of laughter about oneself. There is malicious humor, which is laughing at other people. But real deep humor is laughter at oneself. Now, why fundamentally do you laugh about yourself? What makes you laugh about yourself? Isn't it because you know that there is a big difference between what goes on the outside and what goes on the inside? That if I hint, you see, that your inside is the opposite of your outside, it makes people laugh. If I don't do it unkindly. If I get up in the attitude of a preacher and say, you're a bunch of miserable sinners and you ought to be different, nobody laughs. But if I say, well, after all, boys will be boys and girls will be girls, and we all know, then people laugh. Nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success exploring your motivation and your dark, unconscious depths, that nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success, but there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. You know. Now, you see, what's happening when we do that? Now, I passed you around a lot of embroidery to look at before we started. And I'm perfectly sure that you got the point. That there's a big difference between the front and the back. In some forms of embroidery, the back is very different from the front because people take shortcuts. In the front, everything is orderly, and it is supposed to be kind of messy on the back side. See, which side will you wear? You've got to be sure you get the front in the front, have the back in the back. The back has all the little tricks in it, all the shortcuts, all the lowdown that people don't acknowledge. And it's exactly the same with the way we live. You know, like sweeping the dust under the carpet in a hurry just before the guests come. I mean, we do ever so many things like that. And if you don't do it, if you don't think you do it, and you think, well, really, my embroidery is the same on both sides, see? Well, you're deceiving yourself. Because what you're doing is you're taking the shortcuts in another dimension, which you're keeping out of consciousness. Everybody takes the shortcuts. Everybody plays tricks. Everybody has in himself an element of duplicity, of deception. Because you see, from this point of view that I'm discussing, where the web is the trap, to be
is to deceive. Nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success exploring your motivation, your dark, unconscious depths. That nobody can be completely honest. You will try and have a great deal of success, but there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. To be is to deceive. To be is to deceive. Think of camouflage. The chameleon who changes its color. Think of the butterfly pretending it has eyes. Think of the flower saying to the bee, like my honey? Bee says, wow. But then that means that the bee has to be. It has to go on living and all the trouble it takes to go around collecting honey and raising other bees and organizing itself and doing that dance which tells the other bees where there's more honey. There's all that stuff to do. But the flower was deceptive. Life is a drama, and a drama is a deception, a big act. When you peel an onion and you don't really understand the nature of an onion, you might look for the pit in the center, like any ordinary fruit has. But the onion doesn't have a center. It's all skins. So when you get right down, there's nothing but a bunch of skins. You say, well, that was kind of disappointing. But of course, you have to understand that the skins are the part that you eat. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. That's why in Zen discipline, they give you koans which require a perfectly genuine act. An act of total and absolute sincerity. And people knock themselves out trying to do this thing. But they always know that the master's going to catch them. Because he reads their thought. You know that story of von Kleist about the man who had a fight with a bear, and the bear would read his thoughts? So that the only way of hitting the bear was to do so not on purpose. Because the bear would know in advance. So it's the same in working with a Zen master. You have to do the genuine act, not on purpose. But since you're put in a situation where it's rather formal, and you're supposed to do it on purpose, you're stuck, see? So you explore the onion, and you go in and in and in, and then you find, well, it's all a deception. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. Well, in rather the same way, you find when you explore yourself and your motivation, you go through and through and you try to find out that thing which really is genuine. That thing which really is genuine. then the question arises, who's deceiving who? Who's fooling who? I'm fooling me? What is fooling? Now then the question arises, who's deceiving who? Who's fooling who? I'm fooling me? What is fooling? Fooling is playing like you're there when you're not. You know, getting somebody else to answer your name in the roll call. So, we're all, you see, this is the metaphysical basis of it. This is what the Hindus mean by Maya, the world illusion. The world is playing it's there when it isn't. And it's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. And it's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. And it's a thorough big trap too. But always, when you get an idea like this or a feeling like this, follow it to its extreme. Don't back out from it. If you find you're selfish, go to the extreme of what selfishness means. Confusion largely results from not following feelings or ideas to their depth. You know, people think they want to be immortal. They'd like to live forever. Do you really want to do that? Think about it. Really go into it. What it would be like. People say they want this, that, and the other. They want this kind of car. They want this kind of dress. This much money, and so on. It's always a good idea to think it right through. What it would involve to be in that situation, to have those desires fulfilled. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. It's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. Also, when you form a relationship to another person, think it through too. You see? How inconvenient would they be? However attractive. Always turn the embroidery round and look at the underside, but don't get caught doing it. See, that's something one does on the side, in secret. Because otherwise you play the game that everything is as it's supposed to be on the front. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. But that makes you humorous. And that makes you human. we've discussed the web from 3 points of view. As an analogy of the selective operation